Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boozer, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's CUGC user share. We're going to be talking about managing Citrix virtual apps and desktop disaster recovery, as well as disaster recovery as a service. But before I hand things over to Samuel and Christian to get started on our presentation today, just want to remind you that if you have any questions during today's presentation, we'd like you to type those into the question panel over to your right. We won't be taking questions during the presentation. We're going to save those up for the end, but do type them in as you have them, because we'll get to those, or as many of those as we can, after everything's done. And anything we can't get to, I think Samuel is going to work on doing those in a blog post for us after the fact, but hopefully we'll have time for everything. And one more note before we get started, this session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording via email tomorrow afternoon, so stay tuned for that as well. And with that, I'm going to hand things straight over to Samuel and Christian to introduce themselves and get us started.
Okay. Hello. So thanks, Stephanie, for the intro, and thanks everyone for joining us for this webinar. So my name is Samuel Legrand. I'm living in France, Paris, and I'm working from my own for medium to large customers, and I'm trying to help them in the design and the implementation of virtualization solution. As an active member of the community, I've been awarded by Citrix as a CTP, and I also have awards from other vendors like VMware, Azure, and Parallels. I am also the co-founder and leader of the French CUGC.
I'm Christian Brinkhoff. I'm living in the Netherlands in a city called Nijmegen, nearby the German border. I'm a networking SIG leader for the CUGC, and as well as Samuel Citrix CTP. So pretty honored to be part of that family of great people. And besides that, I'm involved in several other communities, such as the Microsoft Azure MVP and VMware via Expert program. Next slide. So basically what we're going to discuss during this webinar are the definitions of disaster recovery. So what means a percentage of an SLA of downtime in real time, in real life, the causes of DR scenarios, and the architecture within Citrix in a DR scenario, Citrix virtual apps and desktop DR specific use cases. So Samuel is taking that part. Why disaster recovery should matter, so why it's important for you to have that backup plan in place and be confident about your environment, how to avoid a disaster, so it's sort of best practices, tips and tricks on that part as well. What is DR as a service, so disaster recovery as a service, so what are the big benefits and disadvantages of that as well, so maybe it's something that you can use in your environment. So I will explain that later on in this presentation, as well as a look and feel demo, so how you can experience yourself how easy it is to fill over to Microsoft Azure from a Citrix cloud or a normal regular virtual apps and desktop environment. And afterwards, I give some tips on other HA approaches, so to sort of increase the availability of your environment. And as Stephanie already mentioned, if we have time left at the end, we also have room for a question and answer. Next slide.
So yes, like during the Apollo 13 mission, you need to be trained and ready to face things that can be predicted. So the main idea of our presentation is to give you some advice and guidance on your journey to the perfect disaster recovery. So let's start by a quick question. The first question, do you currently use a disaster recovery solution?
Okay, so then will we see like 50% yes, 25 no, and 27 something we are considering. So that's great. That is something that I experience as well from the field. I don't know if you see that sort of same difference in amount on your customers, Samuel.
Yeah, some of my customers are enforced to have a disaster recovery, but like banks who are to follow regulations, all these things. But yeah, I see a lot of people interested in the DR, so that's the purpose of our presentation. So I was looking at the dictionary when I start to think about creating this session. And if you look at the dictionary, at the Cambridge Dictionary, the disaster recovery is a job or activity of helping a company to continue business and get back any lost data if there is a serious problem with their computer systems. So that's summarize what we need to do: get back the business working. The two first things that you need to worry about when you start to think about disaster recovery are the two key metrics that are RPO, standing for recovery point objective. So how much data I can lose, and the RTO, which stands for recovery time objective. So for how long can I be without IT? So yeah, it's important to know how many data you can lose. For some customer, it's more important to get back in the business quickly, but you can have like a full day of data loss because data is not important for them. But for others customer, it will be like critical to be like at the last minute of before the disaster. So you need to define, to be able to set up the correct disaster recovery. You need to think about those two metrics first. Christian?
Yes, so regarding the availability percentage in sites, most of the vendors are giving a 99.9. Can you push the next button for the animation? So most of the vendors are giving a 99.9% of availability at their DR solutions, such as Azure Site Recovery, but as well Citrix Cloud's giving a 99.9 SLA uptime agreement, or sort of an insurance actually, which is in real time, in real life, 8 hours, 77. So which is sort of like 8 hours and 45 minutes. So that's the amount of time that is maximum allows for a vendor to have downtime. So which is pretty low, right? So if you calculate in the past what time or with what downtime you had, it's probably very useful for you to have a DR solution available which can overcome that downtime in your on-premises environment. So give a very clear view to have like a comparison between the percentage and the real time and real life. So next slide. So causes of a disaster recovery scenario. So what you basically see in a segmentation of 4 parts, you see operational failures, national disasters, human caused events, as well as others, and others are the sort of undefined errors that takes place in an DR scenario. And the most common and most reoccurring issue is obviously power failure. So just an electric power failure, or an ISP or UPS failure on the data center. And second, IT hardware failure. So just the hypervisor or the server shuts down, or is damaged, or has an outage for certain reasons. Then we have network failure, as well as software failure. And then we have the big disasters, such as a hurricane, flood, winter storm, fire, and earthquake. So based on that, you probably need a different approach. So your data center needs to be like in a different region to overcome a hurricane. So that's part of your strategy and of your of the place that you place your secondary data center in, or your Azure region, for example. So next slide. And of course, when you have a DR solution, test it multiple times per year. So for example, when you have a major change in your environment and you have a very good backup or disaster recovery plan with a procedure of all your components in your environment, and you change something in that, you need to retest that complete plan, because otherwise when shit hit the fan, you probably end up with a section in that plan that doesn't work as it was before that major change. So be aware of that, otherwise you will end up in this solution or this picture. I don't advise you to be sort of reactive to that and be proactive. So next slide.
So let's talk about disaster recovery scenarios and architecture. So we can have like sometimes a complete and total disaster. And let's talk about the different kind of architecture of disaster recovery. So the first one, for most of my customers, the most used one is the active-active scenario. So basically everything is replicated in the data disaster side. We have duplicate hardware. We have everything that occurs on the primary side is also occurring on the secondary side. So it's active synchronization, and everything is load balanced between the two data centers. So that's something that needs to have like NetScaler in front of it with GSLB to load balance user based on their location, for example. And you have like a data center 1 and data center 2 that can handle the whole load of your workload. If we look, the active passive is almost the same. You have the infrastructure, but in the normal scenario, everything is running fine in the data center 1. And once a disaster strikes, the second site must be broken up entirely. So it's only as current as the last backup. So you have like a daily backup, and you can go to this backup, or if you have like SAN replication, you can also have like an hour delay between, and it's based on your recovery time objective that you need to choose between active-active and active-passive. And you could also have hardware waiting for the disaster. That's an approach that can be useful if you don't need like a direct move to the disaster site. And the third one is more like a combination of both. So you have some components that are online already. Like if you are in a Citrix environment, you can have your controllers already ready, because if it can be hard to get them built during the disaster. So you have some of the components like NetScaler, storefront, controllers already ready, and you just have to restore the VDA, for example. So, and in this kind of scenario, one thing that is really important is that you must define the priority of each component you need to recover. And if the disaster occurs, you can provision capacity as needed. It's like something really common. I'm seeing really this kind of DR in a cloud scenario. So Christian will talk about more later during this presentation. So we are all Citrix experts. We are trying to design virtual apps and desktops highly available. The good thing is that the product is already designed to be highly available. You can have multiple delivery controllers. Storefront is easy to do. the things. And Citrix is giving us like some recommendation in the Citrix Virtual Desktop Handbook that you can find in the link I put on the slide. And you will learn that Netscaler can help a lot. And you need to do things based on your environment. If you look at this picture, everything is fine. The security is there, everything, but you don't need stairs there. So you need to design it like based on your needs and based on your infrastructure. When we talk about disaster recovery, we try first to avoid the disaster, and avoiding the disaster came by having a good infrastructure deployed using most of the high availability solution that we can have. So for each component that are critical for the infrastructure, we will set up it in a high availability mode. If we talk about SQL Server, for example, we will use SQL mirroring or always on availability groups or other solutions that can make us sure that the SQL database for XenApp or virtual apps and desktops be sure that the delivery controller will always have access to a SQL database. If we talk about storefront, there are a ton of solutions available for HA. So you put 2 servers when you need one, and you can use Microsoft network load balancing, DNS round robin, software load balancing like pfSense and Nginx. Hardware load balancing, Netscaler is a good friend of storefront because we already have all the built-in monitors to monitor the storefront services. If we look at the delivery controllers and VDA, it's almost the same. We put like an N+1 method. If we need 2 delivery controllers, just put a third one, and we'll be able to handle the load if one is going down. For VDA, in terms of virtual apps or XenApp, you just had one more server that you need, and you can afford to lose one XenApp server. Regarding delivery controllers, there is no need to load balance for small infrastructure because it's built in the product. The VDA will try to connect to a first one. If first one is not available for any reason, it will switch to the second one. And if you want to load balance your delivery controllers, for example, for XML brokering, it's fine, but you should never use that VIP to try to register your VDA because it's not working, as Kerberos will not be able to work correctly. So yeah, like I mentioned, storefront and VDA can handle a list of DTCs. So you can use one available, and we don't need to enforce to have a Netscaler or any load balancing solution for this part. So it's a real use case I had at the customer side like I think 2 years ago now. It was on 7.6, last LTSR at that time, and basically it's a big customer running 40,000 concurrent users in an active design, and we configured like 20,000 users connected per data center with a data center affinity. Each user was connected to a dedicated data center, and in case of disaster, it will connect directly to the second one. We found that during a big outage, we have like by analyzing the logs, we found that during the data center going down, we found that 80% of the users were reconnecting in a minute. So if you do the math, and I made it for you, it's more or less 266 users per second trying to log on the remaining data center. And Of course, you cannot have the power or the load to get this working, because we found out using Login.DSI on a good physical server with plenty of RAM, like 200 gigs of RAM, 40 cores, a good server running Windows at that time was 2008 R2, can handle like a user every 15 seconds. If you want, again, to do the math, if you want to handle the reconnection or the relogon of all the users, you will need 4,000 boxes to support this load, which is quite insane. So it happens at my customer side, and we create a support ticket because the remaining data center went down. And one of the things was, what about the concurrent Logon Tolerance setting? It's a settings that is available in the Citrix policy since 7.0. And it's from the doc, it's a way to control the number of pending logons a server OS machine can concurrently accept. And this seems to fix our issue to limit and to stop the user to connect if there is already 2 users trying to connect to the server. By default, this setting is set at 2, and it's like the issue we had is that if all servers are at the higher than the concurrent Logon Tolerance setting, the next logon request is assigned to the server with the lowest pending logon. So it didn't block the user to connect. It just put another one in the queue. And the result at the customer site was a blue screen of all the remaining servers. So they had an issue with one data center, and 2 minutes after, the second data center went down. So that's what we can call an epic fail. So we raised the support ticket, and as a CTP, I do have access to product management, and I asked the product manager of the brokering at Citrix, and we asked for enhancement request, and it came with 7.14. So now you have a registry key for XenApp or virtual apps, which is in HTLM software policy Citrix. The desktop server Logon Tolerance is hard limit. It's a cool thing because you can say, if I set tolerance limit, Logon Tolerance limit is 2. If you put this registry value to 1, which stands for true, it will block the user, and you will avoid to have overloaded servers that can handle the load. So you have the user will have a message like cannot start desktop, and you will have an event log in the event log of the server, and we are like having there is no available virtual machine to connect on. So this is something that you should consider if you are using virtual apps or XenApp. And you need to move to if you are in the LTSR, which was the case for my customer, you need to move from 7.6 to 7.15, which is the last available LTSR version of XenApp. If we talk about the desktop OS, like Windows 10, Red Hat, SUSE, Ubuntu, CentOS, the available VDA version for XenApp, you don't care about, for non-persistent, you don't care about the profile. You need to care, sorry, about the profile and workspace, like NAS replication and everything. But you don't need to care about the virtual machine, because you will be able to reprovision a brand new VM for the user. You only need to care about the profile and the application or everything, but it's less complicated when you are in non-persistent mode. For persistent mode, you will have to backup, replicate the infrastructure, and need to have also the N+1 for the hosts. let's talk about why disaster recovery should matter. And this is really important. So, like Christian says, shit happens all the time. It's not matters about if there will be a problem. It's just about when the problem will came. So if you look at the different cloud provider, I just use the fourth well-known: Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, Alibaba Cloud. All of them had an issue which was important or not, but they had an issue this year. So between June and September this year, the fourth major cloud provider had an issue, and there was some users that cannot use their services for some minutes or some hours in the worst case. And you can also have on-prem disaster. We think always about hurricane, but like Christian mentioned, most of the issue are just an electrical outage. But we can also think about NotPetya, which was a great example of a disaster. Here, like some weeks of damages that caused by 1 hour of malware execution. So you can see that some of the main companies in the world has been impacted by those malwares. And human errors also are quite common reason for disaster.
So what is disaster recovery as a service and how Citrix Cloud can help? So basically, disaster recovery as a service is everything the same as just normal regular disaster recovery, but then you only need to sort of like configure the disaster recovery solution, but you don't need to buy, for example, the hardware, rent rack space in an additional data center, and maintain all the parts of the disaster recovery solution. And how Citrix Cloud can help is because Citrix Cloud is working from a control plane, and the control plane holds all the Citrix services, such as the desktop delivery controller, as well as the storefront and the NetScaler. So I will dive deeper in that architecture in the next slide. So can you go to the next slide? So the pros and cons of disaster recovery as a service are sort of like equal in numbers, but you need to check if the sort of use case fits for a disaster recovery service, because when you are a big enterprise customer, you probably need a different approach. But basically, from a disaster recovery normal use case average point of view, the pros are that you don't need an investment in hardware, so you only pay for the software licenses based on operational costs. So from a cloud billing perspective, that's the way to go for new customers that are looking to the cloud. It's very simplified, so it's next finish. You need to enter in the information to connect to your on-premises environment, and that's basically it. And the replication goes over the internet. It lowers your management tasks, so the maintaining part of the disaster recovery solution is taking place from the cloud vendor, such as Microsoft Azure with Azure Site Recovery. Operational cost models, I already mentioned that one, only pay when shit hit the fan. So you only pay for standby costs, which are $25 per replicated instance when you talk about Azure Site Recovery. So you only pay like for the resource consumption costs when you have a real disaster. So when nothing happens and you only need a disaster recovery scenario for regulation or anything like that, then it's very cheap. So you can easily convince your manager for that probably. And it's multi-tenancy secure, so you can like make snapshots as well for SQL and application databases. So it's not needed to have, like, when you have a big enterprise environment, it's not that is a limitation or something. It's enterprise proof as well. So the cons are, yeah, you're not a control anymore. So basically the complete infrastructure of disaster recovery is managed by the vendor, the cloud vendor. So probably that's something you need to consider to choose. It's limited in platforms and global locations. So you only can pick the location that is supported by the public cloud vendor. HA and active mirroring require the purchase double the infrastructure. So when you do it yourself, you need to manage everything and need to build everything your own. So that can take a lot of time and yeah, cost you a lot of money, and you probably only use it once or twice or maybe never. So it can feel like a waste of money. You must maintain the full second site, so you need to take care of the updates and everything around that. Staff is required, so you need to probably hire additional people to maintain that environment. The hypervisor support is only limited to the hypervisor you're using, and with a disaster recovery scenario, you can use multiple hypervisors to replicate from. And costs, obviously. So costs are depending on the workload, which can be much cheaper in a disaster recovery scenario. So next slide. And as well, disaster recovery as a service is based on the public cloud. So when you, for example, synchronize your on-premises environment to the public cloud, such as Azure Site Recovery, you are sort of one step in the cloud. So when you fill over to that cloud vendor, you fill over to the infrastructure as a service environment from that cloud vendor. And with that, you have like an easy button to migrate to the cloud. So that is sort of like a very common use case that comes along right now to leverage cloud solutions, or just not ready for the cloud and have like one step in between and use a disaster recovery as a service solution to not just migrate, but sort of prove to migrate to that cloud vendor infrastructure service environment. So be aware of that. That can come in handy sometimes. So next slide. And regarding the Gartner quadrant of this year, you see like the leaders of disaster recovery as a service, which is like Microsoft, and Microsoft has only one disaster recovery as a service solution right now from within Azure, which is Azure Site Recovery. So that's the main reason why I cover most of those parts, and obviously because I'm an Azure MVP as well. But yeah, the numbers saying it as well. So next slide. So Stephanie, can you pull up the next poll? So are you considering disaster recovery as a service anytime soon? So the answers are yes, no, something we have considered, we don't know, or we don't see the benefits of it yet. So let's see. So most of the answers are something we are or we have considered. There's sort of like a balance between yes and no. And 12% we don't see the benefit of it. Okay, cool. So hopefully that changed after this webinar, but we will see. Next slide. So what solutions are you looking for? It's a follow-up question. So the answers are to an ISP provider, Azure Site Recovery, Amazon, or we just manage our own disaster recovery environments. Okay, so the big leader is probably we manage our own. But in second place is disaster recovery to Azure Site Recovery. So that's very positive. Okay, next slide. So based on the infrastructure, this is a Citrix cloud environment. Normally in a production environment when nothing happens, you will see a Citrix Cloud user session to the Citrix workspace. And when you use the normal Netscaler or ADC as a service solution, you come in to that ADC, and that ADC connects to the delivery controller, and to the delivery controller to the cloud connectors to your on-premises environment. So that's basically how it works from a production point of view when you use Citrix Cloud. So next. So when a DR scenario of Azure Site Recovery is in place, you basically need to build up that Azure Site Recovery environment upfront, as well as the service of Azure Site Recovery. So that's sort of like a vault service that is available from the menu of Azure. And you need to build up upfront that cloud connector in that secondary resource location, that DR Azure resource location. And that is sort of like a standby environment. So from that side, the replication takes place to an Azure ASR management server, which needs to be installed in your on-premises environment. And that can be on a VMware workload environment, as well as Hyper-V and physical PCs. So it's sort of like an agent on that machine, which is synchronizing the complete C and D and all the other disks that are available on that machine to that ASR management server. And that ASR management server are holding 3 different walls, which is the master target server wall, the process server wall, as well as the normal management orchestration wall. And those 3 walls are replicating that VHD. It combines all the files and makes it in a VHD over the internet to an Azure storage blob. And that process is only active, or that replication is always active, but failovering process is only active when you push the failover button. And that's the time when the resource consumption calculation takes place. So next slide, or next button. So when there is an outage, the VHDs will be spun up from the Azure storage blob. And with that, virtual machines will be created in infrastructure as a service of Azure. So one remark to make is that desktop operating systems are currently not supported within Azure Site Recovery. So only when you use like XenApp or virtual apps on a multi-user RDSH perspective, that's only supported for replication right now. So keep that in mind. But yeah, almost 60% of the Citrix customers are using that, or maybe a mix, but then you probably need to use an alternative for the desktop OS. So next slide. And so then the machines are turned up, and you can connect to your sessions again, to that same Citrix workspace user session, to that same ADC. So nothing happens on the Citrix cloud side. And your secondary environment, your DR environment, is up and running again. So the RTO, the average RTO that is possible with an ASR scenario is like 15% or something. So that's pretty awesome for the cost that you need to make for the DR solution in Azure. So keep that in mind. So next slide. So regarding Citrix Cloud and then the Citrix Cloud configuration part. So you obviously need to create a secondary resource location. So a primary one for your on-premises environment, or just your primary environment in another cloud, and another additional resource location for Azure for your site recovery environment. So you need to create 2 resource locations, and based on that, you need to implement at least 1 cloud connector, but the recommended amount is 2, because high availability load balancing takes place between those 2 cloud connectors. So when, for example, 1 cloud connector is down, your complete site is down. So you need to have like a secondary cloud connector for that as well. And another tip on that is that you need to put, when you talk about Azure, put that cloud connectors in the same availability set to overcome outages within that Azure data center as well, because otherwise it will place probably in the same workspace of servers within Azure. So next slide. So when you talk about the machine catalog configuration within Citrix Cloud, so basically for the secondary DR location within Azure, you need to create an additional machine catalog environment. So you can do that in two different ways. So one way is to do this after the disaster takes place and after the master image is replicated to Azure and it started. So you can do it at that time. Another approach is to replicate that server or to create a standby server in Azure and update that master image together, so simultaneously through an automated process or something. So that are sort of two approaches. So you can replicate that master image to the DR solution in Azure, and another approach is to just create an additional machine catalog with a standby machine in Azure. But for that, you need to update that master image simultaneously. So when you have like an automated process, then it's very easy to do. But otherwise, you probably will do this after the DR as part of your your DR plan. So next slide. And the delivery group part, can be done up front for both scenarios. You need to create obviously two delivery controllers, one for the production and one for the backup. And that's just regular, and you can configure them just the same as your normal on-premises environment, the same groups, because that Active Directory server will be synchronized to Azure as well. So next slide. One huge or big tip is to use the priority option within the application. So when you have multiple published applications in the Citrix Cloud or in just a normal on-premises environment, and you have a secondary DR environment available, and you configure that up front due to resource locations, Citrix Cloud connectors, or the machine catalogs and delivery groups, you can configure them proactively and upfront by placing a additional delivery group underneath the production delivery group with a higher priority. So when the lowest priority delivery group is down and not available, the other one takes over. So that is sort of like a very fast way to overcome a disaster recovery process, to not have like manual or PowerShell connections to that brokering to make that new delivery group primary. So this is an approach that you can use only for published apps. For the full desktop or for the desktop delivery group part, you need to do that probably manually or to PowerShell in DR plan, in the procedure when an outage takes place and the recovery plan needs to be done. So next slide. So you are probably now very curious how Azure Site Recovery looks like. So I made a small demo which explains how the process works, so how a disaster recovery works from Azure. So this is a Azure Site Recovery vault. So here you can see that my Citrix environment is already healthy, which means that it is synchronized to Azure. So now the complete infrastructure is already activated. So I'm going to start a test fill over to Azure. But before I do that, you can look in the properties of the machine before you fill over. You can change everything what you want, like sizing, computer name, as well as networking, IP addresses, and the use of hybrid use benefit programs to lowering your costs on licenses. But basically, when you synchronize to Azure Site Recovery, you can test your plan, and with that, you can choose like out of different recovery plans and place them in a failover in a separate network or in the production network, whatever you want. But in a test scenario, you don't want to do that. So when you are filled over, the machine is created, and you will see it in the virtual machines part of your Azure subscription. So it starts up automatically, and therefore there's an RDP connection available to set up that connection to that environment, and then you're basically back up and running again. So that's very easy, very simplified. It's not hard to do. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that some applications are asking for a manual approach, or you need to do something such as DNS, dynamic DNS, or anything like that to have it like sort of like flexible to move it to a different environment. So be aware of that. So next slide. So that was sort of like the small demo of how Azure Site Recovery works. So if you're interested in this process or a larger demo or anything of that, I advise you to look up my website, christianbrinkhoff.com, and I have several articles based on this, so that you can use to gain an additional knowledge on this part. So what about other HA approaches? So probably not for every use case DR is a solution because of cost or anything like that. But from an HA perspective, from high availability to increase the or to decrease the risk, so to decrease the amount of risk that can be causing an outage and to increase the availability of your environment, you have like the possibility within the Citrix Cloud to use local host cache. Local host cache, we probably all know that from the on-premises environment, from the delivery controller to ensure the availability of your sessions when the database is down. So the Citrix Cloud version of that works almost the same, but then the Citrix Cloud is obviously down. So when the Citrix Cloud is down and you want to ensure the connection to your images in Azure or any other environment that uses Citrix Cloud, that can be used with the same architecture as the on-premises local host cache. So Samuel, can you push the button? It's the same technology, but then only for the cloud, for Citrix Cloud. So a different approach. So a requirement for that to use that sort of insurance, you will need to have a NetScaler or ADC and a storefront server in that separate resource location, such as Azure. So you can ensure that session connection availability only through that cloud connector. So you need to have that ADC and that storefront available. You can use like that for just only backup purposes. So you can put that machine down, you can shut it down and only start it up when an outage is there. So that's a different approach to sort of save cost on the resources. So basically, when the Citrix Cloud is down, normally the remote broker works directly to the config service. But when a resource location cannot connect to the Citrix Cloud, the connections goes then directly to the config service, then to the high availability service, and then the local DB of that cloud connector takes over. So that holds all the normal SQL database parts that are needed to continue sessions and new sessions to your broker and to your images, your workers. So that is basically the free available insurance that you can use to overcome outages from the Citrix Cloud. So next slide. And another approach, and that's only when you have like the primary environment available in Azure, is to use availability zones. And availability zones are a replication of your servers to another data center further away than at least 10 miles. So you have like a replication of your virtual machine directly to an additional data center, like 10 miles or more away in that same region as well, with an independent power, cooling, and networking system. So from an data center outage, then you are probably covered, but you don't have the possibility to have like create snapshots or procedures, automation procedures, anything like that. Any customization is not possible, but probably for some use cases to ensure the uptime of your primary data center, that is probably enough to suit your use case. So be aware of that. It's cost nothing. It's only causing that replication traffic and that data traffic, but the service is for free, and it's a 99.99% SLA insurance. So that's like 35 or 53% of or 53 minutes of downtime. And another remark to make is that it is only available within Azure Europe, North Europe, US Central, France Central, and West US too. And the other regions are coming very soon. So next slide. Yeah, next. So this is just an animation of breaking down that other part.
So if we look at the key takeaways from this presentation, the first one is to define your RPO and RTO. So basically the SLA you need to follow. Use high availability to avoid unneeded disaster recovery. Make technical testing for your DR plan 2 or 3 times a year, or even more if you do major change in your infrastructure. Don't forget business testing. So you need to be sure that the business application are still running when you are in a DR mode. Citrix apps on desktop is designed to support outage, so that's a cool thing. And if we are more focused on the cloud things, Azure Site Recovery works perfectly together with Citrix Cloud. It doesn't require additional hardware investment or own separate data center location, so it avoid cost. And for now, it's only support Hyper-V on VMware on premises workloads. Citrix Cloud is built upon Microsoft Azure, and there is an easy lift and shift migration path to Azure when you are starting with a disaster recovery, and you get used to the cloud thing. Now I think we have some time for the questions.
Yeah, we still have 4 minutes left, so I'm scrolling down to the question text field, and I see a question of Alan that asks if PVS VDAs are now supported in Azure. So the answer to that is no, and the reason for that is because PXE or Secure Boot is now active. So PXE is not available for security reasons, probably from within infrastructure services Azure. So the answer to that is unfortunately no. So when we probably move all to the public cloud and then specifically Azure, the amount of customers that are using PVS will lower. But we probably all hear the news yesterday that we can run a PVS based on a VMware cloud upon Azure, or upon Amazon. So that's supported. So from a cloud perspective, you can still use PVS, but then you need to deploy your servers within the VMware vCloud, which is running upon AWS. So Samuel, do you see a question that you can answer right now?
I saw one from Tobias. What's the best way to automate creating backups for the machine catalogs? So the PowerShell SDK from Citrix allows you to manipulate the machine catalog. So it's quite easy to create a PowerShell script that will check the name of the different VM that are in the machine catalog, and then restore them in case of the DR. So that's the best way to handle this kind of or backup restore for machine catalogs.
Okay, so great. So I have another question from, let's see, it's Hatem Kamel. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but otherwise, sorry for that. But the question is, in one of the slides, there was a statement that the disaster recovery as a service is $25 per replicated instance. Which cloud solution is that for, and for how long would that instance cost $25? So that is the pricing of Azure Site Recovery. That is the normal price for every replicated instance that you want to replicate from an on-premises Hyper-V or VMware or physical workload environment, and the price stays the same. The only thing that you need to keep in mind when a real disaster takes place, the resource consumption, the spinning of VMs will cost you money. So the standby costs are very low, but the real spinning up machines in Azure are causing lots of more money. So be aware of that. So we are almost on top of the hour. So I see some other questions, but as Stephanie already mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, we will create based on the poll answers as well as the questions a blog article, which we probably post very shortly, within days. So with that, Stephanie, do you want to add something to that?
Sure. Just want to thank you guys for presenting today. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's much later in the day for you than some of us over here on the East Coast, but I know that everyone on the call is dispersed all over the place. So thanks to everyone for attending today. A couple of items for you are in the chat window. I put a link to the forum thread for this webinar. So if you do have more questions, you can always ask them in that forum thread. I'll make sure Samuel and Christian see those questions. And then the questions, as Christian mentioned, that we didn't get to today, we will put together in a blog post and we'll publish those on mycugc.org as soon as we can. Also, there's a link to a survey in the chat. We love to get your feedback. It helps us plan future webinars. We like to find out what kind of topics you're interested in hearing more about and what kind of webinars you'd like to see. And we are in the process of planning our webinars for 2019. So if you have suggestions for upcoming webinar topics, we'd love to hear them. And with that, I will let everyone get back to their day. Appreciate all your time. And thank you again to Samuel and Christian for being with us today.
Thank you as well for being a great host.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
You guys have a great day. Bye.